Welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. Here, we bring you chilling tales to keep you on edge while helping you unwind. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Got a creepy story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We might feature it in a future video. Now sit back, relax, and let the story begin. I was only 16 when I started babysitting. It was a regular gig for me. A family down the street asked me to babysit for their 5-year-old daughter, Emma. It was an ordinary Friday night. The parents were going out for dinner, and they'd be back by midnight. Everything seemed calm. At first, the evening went exactly as planned. I played with Emma, read a bedtime story, and soon enough, she fell asleep on the couch. I switched on the TV, got comfy, and enjoyed the quiet. Around 11:30 p.m., I heard something strange, a faint tapping sound coming from upstairs. I stood up and went to check. The house was eerily silent. The tapping stopped as soon as I stepped into the hallway. I walked slowly toward the stairs and looked up, but there was nothing. I checked the rooms upstairs one by one, but everything was normal. I decided to try and calm myself. Maybe I had just imagined it. But then I heard it again, the tapping, but this time it was louder. I walked over to the door to Emma's room, but the moment I turned the knob, it felt like someone grabbed my arm. I turned to see no one. Panic set in. I rushed to the living room and dialed the parents' number. I tried calling 3 times, but no one picked up. At that moment, the tapping became more frantic. It was as if someone was walking around upstairs, slow, deliberate footsteps. I was terrified, but I had to stay calm. I locked the doors and checked all the windows. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I kept hearing faint whispers, so quiet, I could barely hear them. I decided to leave, but the front door wouldn't open. I turned the key and tried to pull, but it was jammed. I finally heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The parents were home. I ran to the door and finally managed to get it open. The strange occurrences stopped as soon as they arrived. I told them what happened, but they brushed it off. To this day, I've never returned to that house. Something just didn't feel right. I had been walking dogs for a while to make some extra cash. One evening, I was walking a golden retriever named Max. The owner had given me the usual instructions. Take Max on a walk around the neighborhood, give him some exercise, and return. The neighborhood was usually peaceful at night, but on this particular evening, something felt off. Max was acting strangely. At first, he walked along, but as we neared the park, he stopped suddenly and started growling. I glanced around but didn't see anything unusual. A few people were walking their dogs, but nothing seemed out of place. The growling grew louder, and Max started tugging at the leash. I tried to calm him down, but it wasn't working. As I tugged him gently, trying to pull him forward, he suddenly bolted toward the tree line, dragging me behind him. I was startled and tried to regain control of him, but he wouldn't stop pulling. I finally managed to get him to slow down, but the growling didn't stop. I turned to look at what he was growling at. Nothing. Just the empty park. Then I noticed something. A figure standing under the lamppost, just outside the edge of the park. I couldn't see their face clearly, but they were staring right at me. My heart raced. Max barked loudly, and I tugged on his leash to get away. The figure didn't move. They just stood there, as if waiting for us to leave. I decided to cut the walk short. I started walking quickly back to the main road, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. Max continued barking, looking over his shoulder. As I neared the end of the park, I looked back one last time, and the figure was gone. I didn't feel safe, so I rushed back home. I never walked that route again, and the strange man, who I never saw again, always lingered in my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right that night. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I've never been able to explain it. I'd house sat for friends before, but this was different. This was for an older couple who lived in a beautiful suburban home. I had agreed to stay at their place while they were out of town for a week. They'd given me a few instructions: water the plants, collect the mail, and make sure everything was secure. The first 2 days were normal. The house was quiet, and everything seemed peaceful. I spent my time reading, watching TV, and taking care of their plants. But by the 3rd day, things started to feel strange. I'd come back to the house after running errands and noticed things out of place. At first, it was minor, A book I had left on the coffee table was now on the couch. A mug I had used earlier was no longer on the kitchen counter. I thought it was just me being forgetful. But then, I started hearing noises. Faint creaking sounds in the hallway, soft taps against the walls. Every time I tried to brush it off, the sounds grew louder. I checked all the windows and doors. Everything was locked and secure. Still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. One night, I went to bed around 10 p.m. and woke up to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. I sat up in bed, listening. There was no one else in the house. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was nearly 3 a.m. I tried to calm myself down, thinking it was just the house settling, but the sounds persisted. In the morning, I asked the couple about it when they called to check in. They reassured me that nothing was wrong, but I could tell something was off by the way they responded. I decided to stay another night, but the atmosphere in the house felt even heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. By the fourth day, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags and left in the middle of the night. The unsettling feeling had become unbearable. I never went back to that house again, and I never got a clear explanation from the owners about what happened. But I always wonder if I'll ever truly know what was going on there. I was just 19 when I took a job house sitting for a family I barely knew. They were going away for the weekend and needed someone to look after their place. The house was located in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, and it was beautiful, large, well-kept, and filled with antique furniture. It felt like a step into the past every time I walked through the front door. Everything was fine the first day. I watered the plants, checked the mail, and enjoyed the solitude. But when night fell, things started to feel off. I didn't hear anything at first, but I noticed small things. Pictures on the walls that weren't aligned, doors that I could have sworn were closed were slightly ajar. I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I wasn't used to being alone in such a big house. That night, after I had gone to bed, I woke up suddenly to a loud bang. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing. The noise had come from downstairs. I grabbed my phone and called the family, but no one answered. I slowly crept out of the room, holding my breath, trying to ignore the growing panic in my chest. When I reached the stairs, I noticed the front door was wide open. I was sure I had locked it earlier, but now it was hanging ajar. I cautiously walked through the dark hallway, and that's when I heard it, a low, almost imperceptible whisper coming from the living room. I froze. I turned and saw a figure standing by the fireplace. It wasn't anyone I recognized, just a dark silhouette in the dim light. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone. I rushed to lock the door, but the rest of the night was quiet. In the morning, I told the family about what had happened, but they just brushed it off, saying the house sometimes made strange noises because of the old wooden floors. But I could never shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I had been dog walking for a while. It was a simple gig: take a dog out for a walk, make sure it gets some exercise, and return. But this one night was unlike any other. The dog I was walking was a large German shepherd named Rex. He had always been well behaved, and I had no concerns about taking him out at night. But that night, as I walked Rex down the empty streets, he started acting strangely. He was walking much faster than usual, pulling at the leash, his tail between his legs. I stopped and looked around, trying to figure out what was bothering him, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. It was a quiet neighborhood, and the only sound was the crunch of our footsteps on the gravel. Then, I heard it, a distant sound of laughter, almost like a whisper. It was so faint that at first, I thought it was just the wind. But Rex seemed to hear it too. He started barking frantically and pulling at the leash, trying to get away. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. I turned around to head back, but then I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the street. It wasn't moving, just standing there facing us. The streetlights illuminated just enough of the figure to make out its shape. It was tall and thin, wearing a long coat. I called out, but there was no response. I tugged on Rex's leash and turned to walk in the other direction. As I glanced back over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of the figure moving toward us, its steps eerily silent. My heart skipped a beat. I broke into a run, pulling Rex along with me, not daring to look behind. Rex was pulling harder now, as if urging me to go faster. The laughter I had heard earlier grew louder and more distinct, but it wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from all around me. Panicking, I glanced around frantically, but all I could see was the darkened street and the occasional flicker of streetlights. When we finally reached the house, I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me, breathless and terrified. Rex, now calm, lay down by the door. He seemed perfectly fine, as if nothing had happened, but I was far from fine. I didn't know who or what had been out there, but I felt like something was following me. I kept the lights on for the rest of the night, and when I woke up the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had seen wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I never walked Rex on that route again. In fact, I told the owner I couldn't do late-night walks anymore. I didn't need to explain why. I think they knew exactly what I meant. It was my first time babysitting for the neighbors. They had 2 kids, but their oldest, Lucas, was a handful. At only 10 years old, he was already known for being a troublemaker. His parents told me that he was a bit wild, but I was confident I could handle it. It was a Friday evening, and they'd be gone for a few hours, so it seemed like an easy gig. The first few hours went smoothly. Lucas played video games while his younger sister, Sophie, was asleep in bed. I was sitting on the couch when I heard a noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like something was being knocked over. I went up to check, but Lucas wasn't in his room. I called for him, but he didn't answer. I checked the bathroom, but no sign of him there either. I then heard the sound of something scraping along the floor. It came from the attic. I hesitated, but decided to go up and see what was going on. When I opened the attic door, the room was pitch dark. I flipped the light switch, and there was Lucas, sitting in the middle of the floor, staring at an old doll. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I noticed how strange his eyes looked, dilated, unfocused. I asked him what he was doing, and he didn't respond. He just stared at me. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Something about his gaze made me uncomfortable. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he stood up and said, "You shouldn't be here." I quickly grabbed him by the arm and took him downstairs. He didn't resist, but he didn't speak either. Later that night, when his parents came home, I mentioned the odd behavior, but they just shrugged it off. Lucas was known for his pranks, and they assumed it was just one of his weird moments. But I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something wasn't right that night. I never babysat for them again. One night, I was asked by a neighbor to pick up their mail while they were away for a weekend trip. The job seemed easy enough. It was just a quick stop at their house and a quick return. I walked up to their porch, grabbed the pile of letters, and as I was about to leave, I heard a faint noise coming from inside. It sounded like a tapping at the window. I stopped and looked through the window, but no one was there. I thought maybe it was just an animal, but the tapping continued, now growing louder. I felt a strange sense of unease, but I just chalked it up to the house being old and the wind causing noises. I tried to ignore it and walked to my car, but the tapping was now accompanied by a low voice, almost a whisper, calling my name. I froze. I quickly got in my car and drove off as fast as I could. The next day, I spoke to my neighbor about it when they returned. They had no idea what I was talking about, and there was no explanation for the noise. But I've never gone back to that house. I still can't explain it, and I don't think I ever will. I had agreed to dog sit for a family friend who was going on a weekend getaway. They had a large Rottweiler named Diesel, and he was known for being protective. I wasn't worried. Diesel had always been friendly with me in the past. The first night was peaceful. Diesel and I settled in on the couch, watching TV while the rain pounded against the windows. But around midnight, I heard a noise at the door. I looked up, and Diesel growled low in his throat, his ears standing up. The knocking continued. I cautiously walked over to the door, peeking through the peephole, but no one was there. I was getting anxious now, and Diesel was acting more restless. The knocking continued intermittently, and it was becoming harder to ignore. I eventually decided to call the owner, but the phone was dead. I checked the outlets, and everything seemed fine. Just as I was about to turn in for the night, I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. Diesel started barking uncontrollably, and I ran to the kitchen to find a vase shattered on the floor. I grabbed Diesel's leash and rushed out of the house. I didn't stop until I was safely back in my car. When I called the owner the next day, they were confused. Diesel had never been aggressive before. To this day, I don't know what happened that night, but I couldn't bring myself to return. I agreed to babysit for a family I hadn't met before. They were going out for a dinner date, and their kids, 2 young boys, needed someone to watch them. The house seemed nice enough. Everything went smoothly at first, with the kids playing in the living room and me watching TV nearby. But around 10 p.m., the youngest started acting odd. He was sitting on the floor, staring at a spot in the corner of the room. When I asked him what he was looking at, he just mumbled, "He's watching us." I dismissed it, thinking it was just an imagination of a kid. But the older boy soon joined him, and they both stared into the corner, silent and unmoving. I turned the TV off, trying to ask them what was going on, but neither of them responded. Then I saw it, a shadow in the corner, just barely visible in the dim light. I couldn't make out any details, but it was a dark shape standing still. I turned on the lights, but nothing was there. I quickly gathered the boys and told them we were going to bed. I didn't sleep much that night, and when the parents returned, I explained the strange behavior. They laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I had missed. I had agreed to house sit for my cousin and her family while they went on a camping trip. Their house was located deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. It was peaceful at first, but as night fell, I began to hear strange noises outside. It started with rustling in the bushes, then what sounded like someone knocking on the windows. I checked everything. Windows were locked, doors secured, but the noises continued. I decided to go to bed, but the sound of footsteps on the porch kept me up. Every time I looked outside, there was nothing. The next morning, the noises stopped. I later learned that my cousin had heard similar things before, but they never talked about it.